morning to everyone, and thank you for coming this morning, getting out on a kind of icky Saturday morning. I'm going to start here by telling you my connection to all this. I actually live in Lexington. Why did I come to Louisville? Well, they asked me to, and I've been a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association for about 10 years. My name is Diane Vance. But I taught high school here in Louisville back in the 70s, and some of you may remember Bishop David High School. So that's why I said I know about this high school, teaching stuff. But I ended up getting a PhD at UK, sorry. But it was research connected with Alzheimer's disease. So I have some technical background with Alzheimer's. I did not continue that kind of work for my career, and I really hoped, as we all do, that it would never affect me personally. But it did. My husband got not Alzheimer's, but Lewy body dementia. So I have a connection with both the Alzheimer's world and the Parkinson's world. And I think that's why when the Alzheimer's Association was asked to come and do this talk, I think they thought that I would be a good choice because, I've got a foot in both worlds. One thing I would be curious about, and I just asked the organizers this, I understand that you do get presentations relating to the cognitive issues that can come with Parkinson's. So you have some background in that. This is strictly Alzheimer's. But to make it more relevant and to give you a chance also to ask questions and make comments, I'm going to go through some of this kind of rapidly, like I'm going to skip a lot of the videos. And I'm also, in some places, going to add information that is relevant and useful for people dealing with Parkinson's and Lewy that is not necessarily so relevant and useful for people dealing with Alzheimer's, at least in the early stages. Okay. So at any point, if I'm skipping things, that's why. And also at any point, if you have specific questions or comments, please, these presentations are much more useful if they're interactive. And if I'm not playing college professor standing up here yapping at you while you just, sit there and listen. So please feel free. If you do not want these brochures, just leave them when you're finished, and I will take them back. I do not read slides to people because you are perfectly capable of reading. So here are the things that they will cover in this. And there's a lot of little questions and quizzes and all that kind of thing. Those are some of the things that I'm going to go over kind of quickly. They talk here, first of all, about the impact of Alzheimer's and some very quick questions. What's your guess here?
6 million.
Now, notice that it says living with Alzheimer's. It doesn't include the other dementias.
No.
So there are more, and I'll make some comments about that shortly.
Probably 18.
This is a big one. Many of you here are caregivers or care partners, as sometimes, we might say. Alzheimer's dementias are one of the most expensive diseases. But guess who does most of the paying?
Yeah.
You do. So notice that word, unpaid care. Medicare, Medicaid, they'll pay big bucks to have a heart transplant or something like that. But will they pay to have someone come in and give your loved one a bath once a week? No. So this is a big deal, and it's getting bigger. 11 million. And again, this is Alzheimer's, so really, there's a lot more than this. I'm going to skip this video because it kind of says what we just said with a little bit more. Now, we know that this is false, of course, but you know, when we were kids, probably a lot of us heard others talking about Alzheimer's disease.
Right. About senility.
Or senility, or hardening of the arteries, or things like that. I think for a long time, when we were kids anyway, they used to think it was kind of just normal, but it's not. Is it normal to experience changes in thinking as we age?
Yes.
Of course. Do we look like we did at 25? No. Can we run as fast as we did at 25? No, I wish. And so it's not surprising our brains are slower. That doesn't mean we have dementia. Just because we can't run a 4-minute mile, does that mean we're not physically capable of walking and doing things? Of course not. Our brains are slower, but that doesn't mean we don't still have good cognitive function. And there's a lot of other changes that take place with normal aging too. True. And I'm going to take this opportunity to mention something that I think they don't put a specific slide in here about. And if they do, I apologize for jumping ahead. Is Alzheimer's equal to dementia? No. And now, most of the time, most people in the groups I talk to know that. When we say dementia, what it means is something's wrong up here. But lots of things can cause it. Alzheimer's is one disease that can cause it. If you've been a football player since you were 5 years old, can you have dementia when you're 40?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Is that Alzheimer's? No. You probably heard the letters that go with it.
Yeah.
CTE. They've got brain damage, and they do have dementia, which means disordered thinking, but it's not Alzheimer's. When people get dementia at early ages, in the 40s and often 50s, very often the disease is not Alzheimer's, but it's something called frontotemporal degeneration. And I bet this has been in the news actually not too long ago. There's an actor who was pretty well known who's got this. Bruce Willis.
Yeah,
Not like Alzheimer's at all. No memory problems. What they have problems with is speech and sometimes behavior. There's two variants of it. And I bring that up at this point because FTD strikes people at much younger ages, a lot of times when they're in the prime of their careers, in the 40s and 50s. And that's not typical. I want to emphasize that these diseases are different. They're not all Alzheimer's. You don't treat them the same. You don't see the same things when they're coming on. They don't have the same prognosis. They're different. So that's something that not everybody recognizes. And I'm going to skip the expert, sorry. Picking up on what I just said about dementia, 4 common diseases that are not curable cause dementia. Alzheimer's, frontotemporal, vascular, which means strokes, basically. And the 4th one is the one that probably is most relevant to you, which is Parkinson's and Lewy body. Has everyone heard about Lewy body dementia?
Can you explain what it is?
A little bit. May I ask a question? Is it okay?
Of course, yes, please do.
Is Lewy body's dementia, it can be totally separate from Parkinson's, is that true? Or does it go hand in hand with the Parkinson's?
I'm going to answer it the way it's usually answered, which is it's a continuum.
Of the Parkinson's.
For diagnosis, commonly, if a person presents with cognitive issues before movement disorder, they call it Lewy body dementia. If the person presents with cognitive issues a year or more after Parkinson's is diagnosed, they call it Parkinson's disease dementia. But when they do autopsy of the brain, the little globs of protein that mess up your brain are called Lewy bodies, and it's the same for Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's.
Okay, what is your take on supplements for our brain? Focus factor, Nariva, whatever is out there, do they help? Nope, okay, don't waste my money.
I can say there is no solid clinical evidence that they help.
Okay, thank you.
Is that to say that somebody might not take this, you know, your second cousin twice removed comes up to you and says, oh, I took Nariva and it's just marvelous. Maybe it is for them. It's not to say it can never help, but there's no widespread clinical evidence that it does. So if you try it, just know what you're trying, and also be aware that these things, just because they're natural, like one of these is actually made from the protein that comes from a jellyfish. Fine, you probably have seen the commercials for it. Okay, but what else is maybe in it? I guarantee you that it's not pure protein from the jellyfish. There's other stuff in there. And when you've got supplements, they are not well characterized most of the time. So you don't know what else you're getting. So just buyer beware and user beware if you try these things.
Do you take any supplements?
I mean, I take vitamins, you know, for osteoporosis and things like that, but no, none of the supplements. Now, and I can't say that I have tried them, so I can't tell you from experience whether they work or not for me, but what works for me may or may not be good for you. Anything else? Yeah.
I don't know. My sister, they went through all sorts of tests and that for her. They said that she ended up dying when she was 64. They said she had early set Alzheimer's onset.
Okay.
But I mean, you're gonna go into diagnosis. I mean, it's like they went through all these different tests, and it's like they eliminated all sorts of stuff, and they say, well, it must be all, early onset or something.
Okay, the question has to do with diagnosis.
Yeah.
And the only positively, what do they say, absolutely, positively, way that they know for sure what you've got, honestly, is when they do an autopsy. If you've got Alzheimer's, you're supposed to have plaques and tangles, are the little globs that are in the brain, and there has to be a certain number of them in certain parts of the brain. If you've got Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia, there have to be Lewy bodies, and there have to be a certain number of them in certain parts of the brain. If you've got frontotemporal, there has to be this other kind of protein called TDP43. The point is that the only time they really, really, really know for sure is autopsy. Now, in cities like Lexington and Louisville, where you have major medical facilities, you can get imaging, fancy imaging, what we call PET scans and DAT scans, not just plain old CAT scans or x-rays. Those do not definitely diagnose. You can get, with a good neurologist who is skilled and experienced with all of these fancy tests, the probability is pretty high.
Are the neurologists who specialize in Alzheimer's and?
Yes. And you probably know from trying to get appointments how many of those are around. There's not a lot. There are not a lot. And what complicates it even more as we get older, you've heard that expression, but you can't have it all. Oh yeah, you can. As we get older, what kind of dementias and diseases do we have? Very likely we've got all of them. They call it mixed dementia.
Serious.
And a friend of mine who I just visited last night, her husband died a few years back, Oh yeah, for sure he's got Alzheimer's, no question. She gave me a copy of the autopsy report. And what the autopsy report showed, and this was from not Louisville, but it was from a skilled medical center who knew about these diseases. He didn't have enough plaques and tangles for Alzheimer's, and he didn't have enough Lewy bodies for Parkinson dementia, and he didn't have enough TDP3. He had vascular dementia, which means he had some strokes and, brain bleeds. He had it all. So, and it went with what my friend was telling me, because she was seeing so many different kinds of symptoms. And it's very difficult. It's very difficed to do. And I know that's a long answer to a short question, but it just doesn't have a simple answer.
Have been told that if everyone lived to be 107, they'd all have Parkinson's. Is the same true with Alzheimer's?
Say the first part again.
If everybody lived to be 107, they'd all have Parkinson's.
If everybody lived to be 107, I think I am correct in saying this, you would probably, in your brain, somebody could find plaques, tangles, Lewy bodies, and TDP43, and mini strokes. Does it mean that you will exhibit symptoms? No. One of the things they found with Alzheimer's, some of you may have heard of what was called the nun study. When I was in UK, they were just beginning this. A group of cloistered nuns, what better control group could you get? And there was a researcher at UK who managed to get this entire cloistered convent to agree to be research subjects and donate their brains at time of death. And from that, and also some other studies, they will look at some brains that are loaded with plaques and tangles, and yet they talk to the people around and say, well, was this person really cognitively impaired? No, they seemed okay. So it's kind of a little bit unpredictable, You can have these lesions, and we probably all do have, but do we show them? Not always. It's very difficult to diagnose these diseases. This one, again, I'm gonna skip the video, but what we have just been talking about is why an accurate diagnosis is important. Lewy body, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, frontotemporal vascular are not the same disease. You're not going to treat them the same. If somebody has been having many strokes and has dementia, and a doctor somewhere says, oh, I think they got Alzheimer's, I'm going to give them Alzheimer's drugs. Are Alzheimer's drugs going to work for vascular dementia? No, because it's not the same thing going on in the brain. So as much as possible, you do want a good diagnosis. You probably also know, and they deal with this just a little bit at the end, how many treatments are available for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, Lewy body?
Not a lot. She was on
Not many.
some experimental drugs, but
And there are a couple for Alzheimer's, and when is the best time to use them? As early as possible in the disease. So the sooner you can get some kind of diagnosis, the better it will be for treatment. Lewy body dementia. How many FDA approved drugs are there to treat Lewy body dementia?
None.
And I see you shaking your head correctly. Ain't none.
So
Now,
you-
do they use other kinds of drugs to treat the symptoms? Yes, they can do that.
I guess that was my question.
Yeah, so somebody, for example, with Lewy body who has a lot of Parkinson's symptoms, can they give them carbidopa, levodopa? Yes, they could do that. But is carbidopa, levodopa officially FDA approved for Lewy? No, but physicians can correctly use it off-label. for Lewy itself, there's really not anything. The tricky part with Lewy, you've got cognitive and Parkinson. The drugs that improve cognitive often worsen the Parkinson's. The drugs that improve Parkinson's often worsen the cognitive. So you really, it's a real balancing act to try to treat these. And again, I'm gonna skip the expert. I don't think any of us are capable of interpreting those kinds of scans that they showed up there. But I've already mentioned what they're looking for with Alzheimer's in terms of physical changes in the brain. It's those plaques and tangles. And they basically are little globs of protein that they glob up and they go places they shouldn't go and they kill the brain cells. When we get impatient as caregivers with the people we're caring for, I wish I had remembered this more often, their brains are dying. They are not trying to be a pain in the neck to us. They just can't do any better. And sometimes that can help us when we get short-tempered and impatient with what's going on.
Some of us don't have to try to be a pain in the butt.
Risk factors. This is a question I also get asked a whole lot. My mom, my aunt, my grandmother, they all had Alzheimer's. Am I going to get it?
Maybe.
Not necessarily. Okay. Of these factors, which one is the biggest risk factor?
Age.
So, age is the biggest risk factor, so if you die young, you probably won't get Alzheimer's. Well, that's a trade-off, right? So, yes, the older you get, the more likely it is that you are going to have Alzheimer's. And I think they, I'm going to skip our expert here. I will mention this and then talk about the genetics aspect. African Americans, more likely. Hispanics, more likely, and women. Everybody always asks why, and they don't really know. One thing is that women tend to generally live longer, and remember, age is the biggest risk factor. There may be other things going on too, but it's not well elucidated. African American and Hispanic, how come? Well, we all know, health is a function also of our socioeconomic status and our surroundings and our culture. So it could also, factors for the Black and Hispanic population could also be related to that. So it's, they're not really sure.
And women have to put up with men, so that could be a factor. So.
Yeah.
Definite factor.
No wonder we get dementia more often. I think this next one, if it doesn't talk about genetics, I will. Okay, I'm going to talk about genetics in this spot. There are two kinds of genes, and I'm going to use a couple of words here. One's called a risk gene, and one's called deterministic. Some diseases are deterministic, which means if you've got that gene, you're getting that disease, no ifs, ands, or buts. Have you heard of Huntington's?
Mm-hmm.
Huntington's, deterministic gene. One gene. If you've got that one gene, you're getting Huntington's, that's it.
Is it one of those things that you have to get it from both parents or just one parent?
I think just one parent is enough. But, is there a deterministic Alzheimer's gene? Well, there actually is. However, don't freak out, because there's probably only a few hundred families in the whole world that carry this gene. And if your family was one of them, I can pretty much promise you you'd be part of a research project. Colombia is one area where there are several families that they have studied for years. So you don't need to worry about being part of the deterministic risk. Remember, risk just means bigger chance of. It doesn't mean for sure. You may have heard of the name of the gene that increases your risk. And the letters, these would be capital letters, A, P, O, E, and then there's the number 4 after it. It's a particular gene that codes for a protein that's actually involved in the plaque formation. And if you've got a particular variant of it, your chances of Alzheimer's are greater. For sure? No. Just greater. Okay. And that is inherited.
What are the chances your GP could refer you to an neurologist? How many GPs would recognize the symptoms?
The question about how many GPs would recognize symptoms is a good one. GPs have so much that they need to know about. Typically, a GP won't diagnose Alzheimer's probably not very well.
Could they refer them?
But they would refer to a neurologist. And we all know how hard it is to get into a neurologist. So a referral from a physician can help a lot. In fact, some neurologists you can't call on your own. You know, you have to be referred.
I'm
I'm gonna skip Teresa, Phil, and Tom. This is not any news to any of us who've dealt with Parkinson's. Progressive. Gets worse. Neurological, brain and nervous system and disease. Okay. So Alzheimer's is no different in that respect. And they often call it, well, sometimes early, middle, and late. This slide uses the term mild, moderate, severe. How about MCI? Have you heard that, seen that anywhere?
Mild cognitive impairment.
Mild cognitive impairment. You can tell, maybe, and people around you can tell, something's probably not quite right, but does it mean that you have to go into assisted living? Well, no, it just means maybe you're a little more forgetful than people expect you to be, or you get confused a little more often, but you still are competent to live your own life independently. Does MCI always mean you're going to go to Alzheimer's? No. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The mild, moderate, and severe, you can kind of guess what happens with the symptoms. At first, you only need a little help with daily activities. As things get worse, you're going to need more help with what they call ADL. I bet you've seen that, activities of daily living, feeding yourself, dressing, finding clothes, that kind of thing. And it does eventually progress to a severe stage where you have to have care, probably pretty much 24-hour care. Is Parkinson's similar to that? Not with cognitive, but with physical symptoms? In a general sense, yeah, you start out and you can still do a lot of things, and it gets worse over time, and you become less and less able to do things for yourself. So, progressive neurological disease. How about Lewy body? Progressive neurological disease. I am going to say here at this point, symptoms. When I say Alzheimer's to groups, what is the first symptom that they think of? Memory loss. If I say Lewy body to you, what is the first symptom?
Hallucinations.
Often hallucinations and delusions.
Isn't that what Robin Williams had?
That's what Robin Williams had. And the Alzheimer people, very unusual for them to have hallucinations and delusions until much later in the disease. For Lewy body, it's one of the first things that happens, and that's very different.
When I first heard about Lewy body, I asked what it was, and somebody said it's like Parkinson's on steroids.
Parkinson's on steroids, and the cognitive thing, yeah.
Well, they said that one of her first symptoms was that she got lost, she couldn't remember how to get home, like driving, she knew something was off, and that was like a early symptom, and she just kept getting worse.
Yeah, getting lost can be a symptom for both Alzheimer's and Lewy. I'm not sure I can say for sure that it's more common in one more than the other. What is more common in Lewy often is what they call a loss of executive function. Executive function is the CEO of the brain. It helps us plan and organize and do all that kind of thing. And John, my husband John, was a high school principal. And you talk about Mr. Organized for a high school principal. And toward the end, it got where I said, you know, you couldn't organize a 2-car parade. And you have to laugh, by the way. If we don't laugh occasionally at what's going on, we'll be crazier than we already are. So when I tell some of these things about him and I laugh about it, I'm not laughing at him. You know, I'm laughing because we've got to laugh at the situation sometimes. But that loss of executive function is big, and so is visuospatial difficulties. And what the heck does that mean?
She had trouble with knowing where a chair was and stuff like that, and trying to sit down was difficult again.
Seeing and orienting yourself in space. So if I walk across the floor and it's a tile floor, and I'm doing this all the time, I'm having some visuals, or I'm going nuts. You know, because I think, oh gosh, that's a big hole somewhere there. Guess what needs lots of visual spatial skills? Driving. Think about that. You gotta see a lot, and you gotta know where you are, and you gotta be able to react fast. Has anybody ever been asked to draw a clock?
Yes.
It's a simple indicator for a GP even of possible problem with visuospatial. First time I saw this happen, and my 150 IQ husband couldn't draw a clock and put the hands on it. And I was just mentally left with my mouth hanging open, but it's an indicator. Now, for the current generation, I think they're gonna have to find a new test, right? Because the current generation, if you ask them to read what we call an analog device, often they're clueless about it, so they'll have to find a new test for that. We kind of already talked about this a little bit. This particular presentation is not specific. There are 2 drugs now that are approved for Alzheimer treatment. What both of them do, remember I said plaques were one of these little protein globs in the brain and kills the brain cells. Both of the drugs that they use for Alzheimer's now can go into the brain and munch up those plaques. And that can make things better for a while. Is it a cure? No. Can you take it ahead of time and prevent it? No. Because there's some serious side effects that can go with it. But those are the only 2 things right now that are approved for the disease itself. Now, can they give drugs for symptoms of diseases? Yeah, they can do that. For example, for hallucinations and delusions. Even for somebody who just doesn't have a neurological disease, are there pills that they can give people to cut down on psychotic behavior? Yeah, there are. You gotta be really careful with Lewy body. Old-time antipsychotics, Haldol, Have you heard of that?
Mm.
These can be really bad for Lewy body patients. They can trigger a very severe side effect. If you ever take a Lewy patient to an ER and they are in a psychotic state, make sure you tell the people that Lewy body might be involved, and so that they do not give them these old antipsychotics. And that's something that not necessarily everybody in an ER would know. There are other antipsychotics, newer ones. There's one called Seroquel, and that is given, and it's not, doesn't trigger that same very bad side effect. And there's one for Parkinson dementia called Nuplazid. And it can be given to Lewy body if the physician judges that it would be helpful. They used to run commercials about it, but they quit because I think it scared people. Do you remember some of the Parkinson's commercials, and they would show the Parkinson person seeing
Oh, yeah.
people, dogs, things, and that was a Nuplazid commercial. And I think it really scared people and they quit running them. Is the drug still there? Yes.
But if you listen to the side effects of most drugs, that should be enough to scare you.
No kidding.
You know,
Oh,
cancer,
isn't that true?
constipation, diarrhea, death.
Yeah. All 700 miles an hour so that you don't have temporary rest.
Yes,
Right.
that's right. We got it. Up here it refers to non-drug options. What are those?
Typically, this is more for the caregiver to do, and it's how we react. It's behavior modification. For example, I'm so dumb. I wish I had known all this. Oh, I wish I had known all this. I would have been so much better a caregiver. Hallucinations. Look at those puppies. Aren't those cute? Look at those puppies.
Yes, yes.
So what did I do?
There are no puppies there.
Wrong. If they're seeing puppies, they're seeing puppies. Oh, aren't the puppies cute? Well, we can't go anywhere. The kids haven't had lunch yet. I might say that there are no kids in our house. Don't say, there's no kids in the house, for God's sake, what's wrong with you? Don't say that. Say, we'll give them lunch when we get back. Not a problem. So how we react has a lot to do with what happens with them. They often say that people with dementia mirror their surroundings. So if you are upset and angry, even though you don't say it, do you think they don't know? Of course they know. You know when somebody's mad at you. You know, you can read their body language. So that's a lot of what they're talking about. One of the big things for Alzheimer's, the very first thing they tell you to do is try to distract them. Because for Alzheimer's with memory loss, guess what? If you can distract them even for a few minutes, what happens? They forget about it. Here's my favorite hallucination. I always have to do this one and say, okay, what would you have said? This is real. Would you look at that? The neighbors are having sex in the tree again. Oh my God. Okay, come on. Let's pull up a chair. What should I have said?
Can I join in?
Come on, let's go in the garden. This is what I mean about, we gotta laugh. It was that awful. Yeah, it was awful, but is it also sort of hilarious in its own, degenerated way? Yeah.
That's a new one to try.
Yeah, so I've gotten all kinds of suggestions like, let's go out and join them, or, oh my goodness, maybe we better lower the shades and go watch TV, and give them some privacy. So, an extra long answer to behavior modification and non-drug things.
I went to see a friend the other day, and she's 85, and she said, I'm finished having babies. And I said, I don't blame you, Carolyn. I said, I am too. I said, who has the patience for it?
Yeah, and that's exactly the way to react. You just go with it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You just go with it.
And you never know what's gonna come out of her mouth, and I just, yeah, I think I'll do that too.
Agree with them. Yep.
Yeah.
This is, while it's running its little thought through my cognitively impaired aging brain, are you all aware of something called Smart 911?
No.
Okay. This is something you should be aware of. If you get online and you look up Smart 911, all one word, you can choose Louisville as a city. Smart 911 is a system where you can go in and enter any information that you would want a dispatcher to know if they were called to your house. And I'm thinking here about situations with, delusions, for example. There have been some really sad situations where a person has called 911 and said, my husband's beating the crap out of me, come here and help me. And you probably know that domestic violence calls are always kind of dangerous for law enforcement.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if this person has hallucinations and delusions, there may not be anything going on at all. The person just thinks there is, but first responders come in like it's a for real situation, and there really have been some very bad outcomes. But if the dispatcher sees, oh, person with cognitive issues, they can tell the responder can come in entirely differently. My favorite story from a cop, got called to a place, person with dementia got a hold of a gun. Everybody cleared out, and they were all outside, and she was inside with the gun. And he had dealt with people with dementia because his grandma had it. So what he does, he doesn't go in with his gun. He stands near the door and he says, Miss Smith, this is Sammy. You get out here and give me a hug. I haven't seen you in forever. He didn't know this woman from a hole in the ground. But he approached it so much differently, and what did she do? She put down the gun, she came out, she gave him a hug. Situation diffused. But otherwise, if the cop first responder, only knows there's a person with a gun in the house, they're coming with their gun too. So this Smart 11, you can also put in if you've got pets, if you've got people in the home who are in a wheelchair and can't get out quickly, whatever you would want a first responder to know. So just a thought. And that's pretty much the last part of this. If you have opportunities for clinical trials, they encourage people to get into clinical trials, and in Louisville, you probably have that opportunity. I think on the back of this, there's contact information for the Alzheimer's Association. There is an Alzheimer's Association program in Louisville, and they regularly give programs that can be helpful to anyone who's dealing with a person with cognitive problems and behavior issues. There's a specific one on how to communicate, on what kind of behavior issues might you face, and what can you do in response. So the Alzheimer's Association can be a great resource. They also have a 24/7 helpline, 2 a.m., you don't know what to do, and you just need to talk to somebody. Somebody is there, and these people are trained, to respond to your questions. They can't fix your problem, but it's somebody who understands that you can talk to. Is everybody familiar with the Lewy Body Dementia Association? Wonderful resource also. Also have 24/7 helpline. I've got a few of their brochures over there if anybody is interested. Lots of good information online if you're dealing with some Lewy body specific stuff. Great resource.
We're hoping that, it's not said that it would, you know, coincide, but where they finally found a biomarker a couple of years ago for Parkinson's, which is a misfolded protein in the spinal fluid, goes to the brain, hoping that some research even probably comes out of that for Alzheimer's as well, because, you know, you already know that Alzheimer's is the buildup of the proteins and the different proteins, so we're hoping that, you know, there's some kind of correlation or link that can help with both there.
FDA actually just approved a blood test for Alzheimer's.
Oh, that's good.
And what they do is look at two proteins, one is called amyloid, one is called tau,
Mm-hmm.
and they make up the plaques and the tangles. And that can be an indicator. It's not a definitive diagnosis, but certainly it's a
That risk.
helpful tool. Like again, you mentioned for a GP, at least, you know, it could give a GP some general information and say, hey, maybe you should go see a neurologist.
Mm-hmm.
As far as psychology is concerned, one of the most effective, there's a lot of treatments in psychology, stay back away from, particularly Skinnerian psychology. That's stimulus responses, and if you see that, run. But one that is very effective is mindfulness training. Especially they found it incredibly helpful for recovering alcoholics and people recovering from drug use. Because their thinking is scattered, and the mindfulness helps people build their daily lives, and they are rewarded by the fact that they're regaining control, and you don't need a lot of training for that. There's a lot of literature about mindfulness.
Is there mindfulness training that you're aware of easily available in Louisville?
Kind of, yeah. We've even had mindfulness seminar. You know, this group here, the educational seminar, we've had that for mindfulness.
Okay, so that might be something people could pay special attention to if you ever
Yeah.
did something again.
Even built
to
into
mindfulness.
like Apple products, you know, like your Apple Watch, it tells you, you know, mindfulness.
Yeah, there are many phone
Yeah.
and watch apps.
Yeah.
If
But
you
there-
read
there's-
it,
There has been seemed to be a lot with mindfulness,
yeah.
being more aware and. Mhm.
Well, you were saying like, you know, there is differences. Do you have like information? I mean, 'cause it seems like even if it is different, there's still different things that you wanna do to help the person. I mean, even if they don't have Alzheimer's, if they have dementia, some of the stuff, it sounds like it still would be helpful.
The biggest thing, what they always tell you to do first before you think about drugs is think about how you respond to the behavior and the situation. And I didn't bring it with me, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. There's an excellent couple of websites that have very specific things about, if you see this behavior, here are some suggested responses that don't have anything to do with drugs. So I can send it to you and you can get it from her, or I can give you my email and you can email me, whatever you'd like if you want to do that afterward. And I can send you those links.
You said you're out of Lexington?
Yeah.
But there's a branch here in Louisville.
Of the Alzheimer's
Yes.
Association, yes, there is. In
Yeah.
fact, it's not far from here.
Right.
Down that way on,
Yeah.
The Canaan
on
Tower,
Dutchman's.
is that where it is?
Any other questions?
Well, I think it's time for me to shut up.
Well, thank you.
So-
Yeah.